All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Juracek. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Choice Partners in Chicago and a founding board member of Mobility Works. And you'll have to excuse me, I have a very sleepy dog right next to me who's moaning. So thank you all so much for attending today's conference. And thank you to all of our speakers, our sponsors, CLPHA and the Poverty and Race Research Action Council, and also our supporting sponsors, Han Partners, the National Association of Realtors, and Zillow. And most importantly, thank you to the staff who helped make today a success. As Andrea mentioned on the last panel, Mobility Works Incorporated as a nonprofit organization this year, and we're preparing a number of learning and community building opportunities that will be available starting next year. We'll be offering a training institute for mobility program frontline staff and managers, as well as a tiered membership program that will include access to program templates and materials so that best practices can be incorporated into your local programs, a monthly newsletter, and more. We'll also be continuing our technical assistance with PHAs across the country, especially as new funding for mobility programming becomes available. As we heard earlier today, hopefully that will come to fruition as Congress moves through the reconciliation process. If you're thinking about how you might create a program in your local jurisdiction, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And with that, thank you again for taking part in today's conference, and I will turn it over to Phil.
Thanks, Andrea, and thanks again to all our moderators and panelists for a really excellent conference, even though we couldn't be together in person. This was actually my 8th National Housing Mobility Conference. My first was in 1994, a good 10 years or so before I came to PRRAC. So I appreciated Todd Richardson's history lesson back in the opening panel, and it's really gratifying to see how far we've come as a movement since then. So I'm particularly honored right now to introduce Stephen Norman, the longtime director of King County Housing Authority, and also the president of CLPHA's board, to give some closing remarks. You know, we on the PRRAC staff took a trip out to Seattle to visit the King County Housing Authority and the Seattle Housing Authority. It was maybe 8 or 9 years ago. Stephen probably doesn't remember this, but that trip had a really profound impact on our work and showed us how dynamic and progressive public housing authorities can be. And we've learned a lot from a number of other public housing authorities since then, including many who've been at the conference here today. On that Seattle trip, we visited 2 really impressive choice neighborhood sites in White Center, an immigrant community south of Seattle, and SHA's Yesler Terrace, which is an old post-war project on a hillside above downtown Seattle, which has been totally transformed. You know, we saw what was possible for families in public housing redevelopment. We also learned about King County's housing mobility efforts, which were perfected years later in the CMTO demonstration that we talked about earlier. We learned about the Housing Authority's long-term goals for increasing the percentage of families with vouchers living in high opportunity areas, which I thought was a really innovative goal to set for a PHA. We also toured some of those multifamily properties that King County Housing Authority had acquired in the opportunity areas east of Lake Washington, which was a particular innovation which I don't think has been followed enough around the country. So I don't think it is taking anything away from the other great staff at King County Housing Authority to say that Stephen's personal vision and leadership has transformed the perspective of PHAs all over the country and has helped lead us to this point where we have 9 metro areas hoping to replicate Seattle's success with the housing mobility demo, where HUD is working to remove barriers to mobility in the voucher program, and where Congress is actually on the verge of funding dozens more PHAs to provide basic housing mobility services. So since we've started this tradition of giving awards for important contributions to the field at these conferences, we could think of no one more deserving this year to receive the award than Stephen. So we have this award, Stephen, that looks kind of like the mountains you can see outside your office probably every day, although I don't see any mountains right now. It says simply 8th National Conference on Housing Mobility, November 4th, 2021. Stephen Norman, an appreciation for your leadership. So thank you very much. We'll ship this to you, COD, and look forward to hearing your closing remarks.
But thank you, Phil. I am following in the footsteps of giants like Alex Polikoff, who have been true pioneers in this field. And I want you to know how much I have appreciated our partnership and how I think it has very much been a two-way street, how much we have learned from the advocacy community and from folks who are working on the ground with the communities we serve. And I think we are all so much stronger for the partnerships that we have. And I think the evidence that you cited is less out of my leadership than it is truly out of the partnership that we've all put together. So thank you as well for your leadership and for all the folks who have been toiling in this field all over the country. So I'm going to take a few minutes today to try to wrap things up from a Hauser's perspective. And I think this has been an absolutely terrific set of discussions, and my thanks to all the panelists and to everyone behind the scenes who worked to cue this up. And I'd like to take a step backwards for a moment and sort of go to the 20,000 foot level and put our conversation around successfully scaling up mobility within an even bigger, more ambitious frame. And I think Peggy Bailey's comments particularly resonated with me, and the notion that HUD is going to a vision which is much more holistic and much more multifaceted, I think really fills me with hope. Because from where I sit, the real challenge, the real question is not so much how do we scale up mobility, but how do we scale up opportunity for all of the 2.2 million households currently in the HCV program living in relatively high poverty, low income neighborhoods. But even beyond that, to the 3 out of every 4 eligible extremely low income households who can't get into the program, but may conceivably downstream as we move towards universal vouchers. So Raj Chetty's research, I think, conclusively shows us that neighborhood quality matters. And this means that we must both expand geographic choice and access to high opportunity neighborhoods, and at the same time, bring opportunity to lower income neighborhoods. Because at the end of the day, no matter how wildly successful we are, a significant percentage of lower income households will still live in neighborhoods with a lot of other poor households. This can't only be about how do we get folks into existing neighborhoods that are identified as opportunity neighborhoods. And some of these folks, let's be clear, live there by choice. There are many reasons why individual households may find it in their best interests to remain where they are, be it a support network, proximity to specific religious institutions, access to employment, family ties. We need to provide the tools and the resources for mobility, but at the end of the day, this is every individual household's choice to make. We need to educate, we need to empower, but not to require. And we need to recognize that the vast majority of extremely low-income households do not currently receive federal rental subsidies. This vision of the Biden-Harris administration around universal Section 8 is an unbelievable game changer. It is the right way to go, but it's a vision that's going to take time. And we also have to recognize that there simply isn't the rental inventory at virtually any price currently available in high opportunity neighborhoods to truly achieve a comprehensive solution through mobility alone. So I get back to the question of how do we scale up opportunity and true regional integration? And I think it starts by recognizing that each region is unique, that housing costs, housing typologies, demographic distribution, transportation patterns, and job proximities all vary dramatically from region to region and remain, along with deeply embedded and strongly standing patterns of racism. And we think we have to recognize the role that equity issues and racism plays in all this. that all of these are the major determinants of where people live. That the urban regions of Seattle, Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, San Francisco all require different strategies in order to successfully support truly integrated communities on a regional scale. So here in Seattle, we're looking at the solution in going in three different directions, three different buckets, if you will. We have existing high opportunity neighborhoods, we have gentrifying communities, and we have lower opportunity, higher poverty neighborhoods. And each of these markets involves different approaches. So I think we've discussed today the combination of approaches that KCHA uses in high opportunity neighborhoods, a combination of mobility and preservation. And I think the longer term challenge in these neighborhoods across the country is going to revolve around injecting more density and a greater range of housing typologies into the mix in these neighborhoods. We've expanded our preservation efforts to preserving housing in gentrifying communities, either neighborhoods being impacted regionally where we are by an expanding sphere of influence of affluence pushing out of Seattle proper, or along emerging light rail corridors in South and North King County. And here we're purchasing existing apartment complexes and recapitalizing public housing to ensure that existing residents are not displaced. And at the end of the day, there is housing at a mix of price points in these communities, so that as we see an expanding middle class exercise the political and economic clout they have to grow neighborhood amenities and opportunity levels, the residents, the existing residents of these communities aren't pushed out. The third bucket, the existing low-income communities, is perhaps the main event from an opportunity perspective. Here, I think place-based approaches that recognize the role that investment in housing can play in creating opportunity is critical. Partnerships with community-based organizations, public schools, public health, workforce development, a conscious focus on empowerment. Much of this is captured in the work CLPHA and the housing authorities across the country are trying to do through our Housing Is initiative. Part of the strategy can also be the creation of home ownership opportunities at multiple price points in these neighborhoods. Government can play a unique role in being able to create economically integrated neighborhoods, such as choice neighborhoods, neighborhoods where a substantial portion of the inventory is subsidized for social housing, but not all. And the example that Phil gave in White Center, traditionally one of the poorest neighborhoods in the entire region, we are now seeing single-family homes sold by private home builders go for $700,000, cheek and jowl with public housing. These mixed income housing markets are inherently unstable without government intervention, and we step in to lock in a percentage of the inventory in these neighborhoods as being affordable over the long term. But again, what we see is we see assets flowing into the neighborhood. So this is a brief and very incomplete vision of how housing authorities need to operate on multiple levels using multiple strategies to achieve truly integrated regional approaches that respond to local market conditions in order to provide opportunity to all, not just folks in our mobility programs. Mobility programs don't lead the way. They have absolutely been essential. And again, it all starts with partnerships. I want to thank PRRAC and CLPHA, Phil and Sonia, for bringing these two like-minded worlds that for many years candidly saw each other, I think, as part of the problem, into this kind of a partnership. We've come a very long way since the early mobility conferences that I've attended, and I think the success of this partnership, again, is reflected in the progress we're collectively making. So my thanks also to HUD and Congress for their good work. It's a daunting task to bring any new initiative to scale on a national level, and we are just starting to grapple with that. Today was a great foundational cornerstone in the next steps that we have to make. And again, really who I most want to thank is everybody in the room today, the housers, the advocates, the clients. You all truly do the heavy lifting, and this is the essential work that underpins our vision of where we need to go as a community. So thank you all for your efforts.
And thank you, Stephen. That was perfect. I think we've come to the conclusion, and thanks to everyone for sticking with us. And we will hopefully see you all next year in person. We'll, keep our fingers crossed about that. Thanks, everyone, and have a great evening.